Good morning. Welcome back. The post-boar hunt. So, let's see. I asked you about how the Halt would treat Will. I'm wondering if they they will be seen differently based on their heroism. Anyways, chapter 2 on. In the days following the boar hunt, Will noticed a change in the way he was treated. Okay, I honestly didn't read that. There was a certain deference, even respect, in the way people spoke to him and looked at him as he passed. It was most noticeable among the people of the village. Being simple folk with rather limited boundaries to their day-to-day lives, they tended to glamorize and exaggerate any event that was in any way out of the ordinary. By the end of the first week, the events of the hunt had been so blown out of proportion that they had Will single-handedly killing both boars as they charged out of the thicket. A couple of days after that, to hear the story related, you could almost believe that he had accomplished the feat with one arrow, firing it clean through the first boar and into the heart of the second. "I really didn't do too much at all," he said to Halt one evening, as they sat by the fire in the warm little cottage they shared on the edge of the forest. "I mean, it's not as if I thought it through and decided to do it. It just sort of happened, and after all, you killed the boar, not me." Halt merely nodded, staring fixedly at the leaping yellow flames in the grate. "People will think what they want to," he said quietly. "Never take too much notice of it." Nevertheless, Will was troubled by the adulation. He felt people were making an altogether too big thing out of it all. He would have enjoyed the respect if it had been based on what had actually happened. In his heart, he felt he had done something worthwhile and perhaps even honorable. But he was being lionized for a totally fictional account of events, and being an essentially honest person, he couldn't really take any pride in that. He also felt a little embarrassed because he was one of the few people who had noticed Horace's original, instinctively courageous action, placing himself between the charging boar and Will and Tug. Will had mentioned this last fact to Halt. He felt that perhaps the ranger might have an opportunity to appraise Sir Rodney of Horace's unselfish action. But his teacher had merely nodded and said briefly, "Sir Rodney knows. He doesn't miss much. He's got a little more up top than the average bash and whacker." And with that, Will had to be content. Around the castle, with the knights from the battle school and the various craftsmasters and apprentices, the attitudes were different. There, Will enjoyed a simple acceptance and the recognition of the fact that he had done well. He noticed that people tended to know his name now, so that they greeted him as well as Halt when the two of them had business in the castle grounds. The Baron himself was friendlier than ever. It was a source of pride to him to see one of his castle wards acquit himself so well. The one person Will would have liked to discuss it all with was Horace himself. But as their paths seldom crossed, the opportunity hadn't arisen. He wanted to make sure that the warrior apprentice knew that Will set no store by the ridiculous stories that had swept the village, and he hoped that his former wardmate knew he had done nothing to spread the rumors. In the meantime, Will's lessons and training proceeded at an accelerated pace. In a month's time, Halt had told him they would be leaving for the Gathering, an annual event in the Rangers' calendar. This was the time when all 50 Rangers came together to exchange news, to discuss any problems that might have arisen throughout the kingdom, and to make plans. Of greater importance to Will, it was also the time when apprentices were assessed to see if they were fit to progress to the next year of their training. It was bad luck for Will that he had been in training for only 7 months. If he didn't pass the assessment at this year's gathering, he would have to wait another year until the next opportunity arose. As a result, he practiced and practiced from dawn till dusk each day. The idea of a Saturday holiday was a long-forgotten luxury to him. He fixed arrow after arrow into targets of different sizes, in different conditions, from standing, kneeling, sitting positions. He even fired from hidden positions in trees. And he practiced with his knives. Standing to throw, kneeling, sitting, diving to the left, diving to the right. He practiced throwing the larger of the two knives so that it struck its target hilt first. After all, as Halt said, sometimes you only need to stun the person you were throwing at, so it was a good idea to know how to do it. He practiced his stealth skills, learning to stay stock still even when he was sure that he had been discovered, and learning that, all too often, people simply didn't notice him until he actually did move and gave the game away. He learned the trick that searchers would use, letting their gaze pass over a spot and then flicking back to it instantly to catch any slight movements. He learned about sweepers, the rear scouts who would follow silently behind a party on the move to catch out anyone who might have remained unseen. Then broken cover when the party had gone past. He worked a tug, strengthening the bond and affection that had taken root so quickly between the two of them. He learned to use the little horse's extra senses of smell and hearing to give him warning of any danger, and he learned the signals that the horse was trained to send to its rider. So it was a little wonder that, at the end of the day, Will had no inclination to walk up the winding path that led to Castle Redmont and find Horace so that he could discuss things with him. He accepted that sooner or later the chance would come. In the meantime, he could only hope that Horace was being given credit for his actions by Sir Rodney and the other members of the battle school. Unfortunately for Horace, it seemed that nothing could be further from the truth. Sir Rodney was puzzled by the muscular young apprentice. He seemed to have all the qualities that the battle school was looking for. He was brave, he followed orders immediately, and he was still showing extraordinary skill in his weapons training. But his class work was below standard. Assignments were handed in late or sloppily finished. He seemed to have trouble paying attention to his instructors, as if he were distracted all the time. On top of that, it was suspected that he had a predilection for fighting. None of the staff had ever witnessed him fighting, but he was often seen to be sporting bruises and minor contusions, and he seemed to have made no close friends among his classmates. On the contrary, they took pains to steer clear of him. It all served to create a picture of an argumentative, antisocial, lazy recruit who had a certain amount of skill at arms. So that's interesting, the perspective when you don't know Horace's backstory and experiences. People look at him and make a judgment about him being lazy, antisocial, mean, when in fact he's turning into himself, and it's because of somebody else's actions and bullying on him. So, all things considered, and with a great deal of reluctance, the battlemaster was beginning to feel that he would have to expel Horace from battle school. All the evidence seemed to point in that direction. Yet his instincts told him he was wrong, that there was some other factor he wasn't aware of. In point of fact, there were 3 other factors: Ulda, Bryn, and Jerome. And even as the battlemaster was considering the future of his newest recruit, they had Horace surrounded once more. It seemed that each time Horace managed to find a place where he could escape their attentions, the 3 other older students tracked him down. Of course, this wasn't difficult for them, as they had a network of spies and information among the other young boys who were afraid of them, both in and outside the battle school. This time, they had cornered Horace behind the armory, in a quiet spot that he had discovered a few days before. He was hemmed in against the stone wall with the armory building, the 3 bullies standing in a half-circle before him. Each of them carried a thick cane, and Ulda had a piece of heavy sacking folded over one arm. "We've been looking for you, baby," said Ulda. Horace said nothing. His eyes shifted from one to the other as he wondered which of them would be the first to make a move. "Baby's made a fool of us," Bryn said. "Made a fool of the entire battle school." That was Jerome. Horace frowned, puzzled by their words. He had no idea what they were talking about. Ulda's next statement made it clear. "Baby had to be rescued from the big bad boar," he said. "By a little creeping apprentice sneaker," Bryn added, the sneer heavy in his tone. "And that makes us all look bad." Jerome shoved him against the shoulder as he spoke, pushing him back against the rough stone of the wall. His face was red and angry, and Horace knew he was building himself up for something. Horace's hands bunched into fists at his side. Jerome saw the action. "Don't threaten me, baby. Time you learned a lesson." He stepped forward threateningly. Horace turned to face him, and in the same instant knew he had made a mistake. Jerome's move was a feint. The real attack came from Ulda, who whipped a heavy Hessian sack over Horace's head before he could resist, pulling a draw cord tight so that he was contained from the waist up, blinded and helpless. He felt several loops of the draw cord falling over his shoulders to fasten it. Then the blows began. He staggered blindly, helpless to defend himself as the 3 boys rained blows down on him from the heavy canes they had been carrying. He blundered into the wall and fell, unable to break his fall with his arms immobilized by his side. The blows continued, falling on his unprotected head, his arms, and his legs, and the 3 boys continued their mindless litany of hate. "Call for the sneaker to save you now, baby. This is for making us look like fools. Learn your respect for the battle school, baby." On and on it went as he writhed on the ground, trying in vain to escape the blows. It was the worst beating they had ever given him, and they continued until gradually, mercifully, he fell still, semi-conscious. They each hit him a few more times, and then Alda dragged the sack clear. Horace drew in one giant, shuddering breath of fresh air. He ached and hurt viciously in every part of his body. From a long distance away, he heard Bryn's voice. "Now let's teach the sneaker the same lesson." The others laughed as he heard them moving away. He groaned softly, longing for the release of unconsciousness, wanting to let himself sink into its dark, welcoming arms so that the pain would go away, and at least for a while. Then the full import of Bryn's words struck him. They were going to give the same treatment to Will, for the ridiculous reason that they felt his actions in saving Horace had somehow belittled them and their battle school. With a gigantic effort, he pushed the welcoming folds of darkness back and struggled to his feet, moaning with pain, chest heaving, head spinning, as he supported himself against the wall. He remembered his promise to Will. "If you ever need a friend, you can call on me." It was time to make good on that promise. Chapter 22. Will was in the open meadow behind Halt's cottage, practicing. He had 4 targets set up at different ranges and was alternating his shots at random between the 4 of them, never firing at the same one twice in a row. Halt had set the exercise for him before he had gone into the Baron's office to discuss a dispatch that had come in from the king. "If you fire twice at the same target," he said, "you'll begin to rely on the first shot to determine your direction and elevation. That way, you'll never learn to shoot instinctively. You'll always need to fire a sighting shot first." Will knew his teacher was right, but that didn't make the exercise any easier. To add to the difficulty, Halt had stipulated that he should not let more than 5 seconds elapse between each shot. Frowning in concentration, he let the last 5 arrows of a set go. One after the other, in rapid succession, they flashed across the meadow, thudding into their targets. Will, his quiver empty for the 10th time that morning, stopped to survey the results. He nodded in satisfaction. Every arrow had hit a target, and most of them were clustered in the inner ring of the bullseye. It was shooting of an exceptionally high quality, and it proved to him the value of constant practice. He wasn't to know it, of course, but there were already few archers in the kingdom outside of the Ranger Corps who could have matched him. Even the archers in the king's army weren't trained to shoot with such individual speed and accuracy. They were trained to fire as a group, sending a mass of arrows against an attacking force. As a result, their training concentrated more on coordinated actions, so that all the arrows were fired simultaneously. He had just set the bow down, preparatory to recovering his arrows, when the sound of a footstep behind him made him turn. He was a little surprised to see 3 battle school apprentices watching him, their red surcoats marking them as second-year trainees. He didn't recognize any of them, but he nodded a friendly greeting. "Good morning," he said. "What brings you down here?" It was unusual to find battle school apprentices this far from the castle. He noted the thick canes that they all carried and decided they must have set out for a walk. The closest of them, a handsome blonde-haired boy, smiled and said, "We're looking for the ranger's apprentice." Will couldn't help smiling in return. After all, the ranger cloak that he wore marked him unmistakably as an apprentice ranger. But perhaps a battle school apprentice was only being polite. "Well, you found him," he said. "What can I do for you?" "We brought a message from the battle school for you," the boy replied. Like all battle school trainees, he was tall and well-muscled, as were his companions. They moved closer to him now, and Will instinctively backed off a pace. They were a little too close, he felt. Closer than they needed to be to pass on a message. "It's about what happened at the boar hunt," said one of the others. This one was red-haired with a heavy dusting of freckles and a nose that showed distinct signs of having been broken, probably in one of the training combats that battle school students were always practicing. Will shrugged uncomfortably. There was something in the air he didn't like. The blond boy was smiling, but neither the redhead nor their third companion, an olive-skinned boy who was the tallest of the 3, looked as if they thought there was anything to smile about. "You know," Will said, "people are talking a lot of nonsense about that. I didn't do much." "We know," the red-haired boy snapped angrily, and again, Will took a pace back as they all moved a little closer. Holt's training was ringing alarm bells in his mind now. "Never let people get too close to you," he'd been told. "If they try to, be on your guard, no matter who they are or how friendly you think they are." But when you go swanking around telling everyone you saved a big, clumsy battle school apprentice, you make us look foolish, the tall boy accused. Will looked at him, frowning. Well, I never said that, he protested. And at that moment, while he was distracted by Alda made his move, stepping quickly forward with one sack held open to throw it over Will's head. It was the same tactic they had used so successfully with Horace, but Will was already on his guard, and as the other boy moved, he sensed the attack and reacted. Unexpectedly, he dived forward toward Alda, rolling in a somersault that took him under the sack, then letting his legs sweep around, scything Alda's legs from under him so that the bigger boy was sent sprawling. But there were 3 of them, and that was too many for him to keep track of. He had evaded Alda and Bryn, but as he rolled to his feet, completing the movement, Jerome brought his cane around in a ringing crack across the back of his shoulders. With a cry of pain and shock, Will staggered forward as Bryn now brought his cane around and hit him across the side. By then, Alda had regained his feet, furious with the way Will had evaded him, and he struck Will across the point of the shoulders. The pain was excruciating, and with a sob of agony, Will dropped to his knees. Instantly, the 3 battle school apprentices crowded forward, ringing him, trapping him between them, the heavy canes raised to continue the beating. That's enough! The unexpected voice stopped them. Will, crouched on the ground, waiting for the beating to begin, arms over his head, looked up, and saw Horace, bruised and battered, standing a few meters away. He held one of the wooden battle school drill swords in his right hand. One eye was blackened, and there was a trickle of blood running down from his lip. But in his eyes there was a look of hatred and sheer determination that, for a moment, made the 3 older boys hesitate. Then they realized there were 3 of them, and Horace's sword was, after all, no more of a weapon than the canes they carried. Forgetting Will for the moment, they fanned out and moved to encircle Horace, the heavy canes raised to strike. Baby followed us, said Alda. Baby wants another beating, Jerome agreed. And Baby's gonna get it, said Bryn, smiling confidently. But then a yell of fright was torn from his lips as a sudden jarring force slammed against the cane, whipping it from his grasp and sending it spinning to land several meters away. A similar yell to his right told him that the same thing had happened to Jerome. Confused, Bryn looked around to where the 2 canes lay. With a sinking feeling, he saw that each one was transfixed by a black-shafted arrow. I think one at a time is fairer, don't you? Said Halt. Bryn and Jerome felt a surge of terror as they looked up to see the grim-faced ranger standing in the shadows 10 meters away, another arrow already knocked to the string of his massive longbow. Only Alda showed any sign of rebellion. This is battle school business, Ranger, he said, trying to bluster his way through the situation. You'd best stay out of it. Will, slowly regaining his feet, saw the dark anger that burned deep in Halt's eyes at the arrogant words. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for Alda. Then he felt the throbbing pain in his back and shoulders, and any thoughts of sympathy were instantly blotted out. Battle school business, is it, Sonny? Halt said in a dangerously low voice. He moved forward, covering the ground between him and Alda in a few deceptively swift gliding steps. Before Alda knew it, Halt was barely a meter away. Still, the apprentice remained defiant. The dark look on Holt's face was unsettling, but seen up close, Alda realized that he was a good head taller than the ranger, and his confidence flowed back. All these years, he had been nervous of the mysterious man who now stood before him. He had never realized what a puny figure he was. Which was Alda's second mistake of the day. Halt was small, but puny was not a word that entered into it. In addition, Halt had spent a lifetime fighting far more dangerous adversaries than a second-year battle school apprentice. I seem to notice that there was a ranger apprentice being attacked, Halt was saying softly. I think that makes it ranger's business as well, don't you? Alda shrugged, confident now that whatever the ranger might do, he could more than handle it. Make it your business if you like, he said, a sneer entering his voice. I really don't care one way or the other. Halt nodded several times as he digested that speech. Then he replied, Well then, I think I will make it my business, but I won't be needing this. As he said it, he replaced the arrow in his quiver and lightly tossed the bow to one side. Turning away as he did so, inadvertently, Alda's eyes followed the action, and instantly he felt a searing pain as Halt stamped backward with the edge of his boot, catching the apprentice's foot between arch and ankle and driving into it. As Alda doubled over to clasp his injured foot, the ranger pivoted on his left heel, and his right elbow slammed upward into Alda's nose, jerking him upright again and sending him staggering back, eyes streaming with pain. For a second or two, Alda's sight was blurred by the reflex tears, and he felt a slight pricking sensation under his chin. As his eyes cleared, he found that the ranger's eyes were only a few centimeters from his own. There was no anger there. Instead, there was a look of utter contempt and disregard that was somehow far more frightening. Whew. I think I'm going to stop there. I wonder what's going to happen next. I wonder. All right, you should wonder too. Have a good day.